Brilliant. So welcome everyone to the first event of the Cumbrian White-Tailed Eagle Project's social feasibility study. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Faye Wiley, the Species Recovery Social Science Officer for the Lifescape Project. So the Cumbrian White-Tailed Eagle Project Steering Group are leading the social feasibility study, and the Lifescape Project are one of 9 organisations that are involved. So this evening we have a presentation on white-tailed sea eagle reintroductions by Duncan Halley, a senior research scientist from the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research. So Duncan has been working with white-tailed eagles now for over 30 years, and his work has heavily contributed to the restoration of white-tailed eagle populations across Europe. Duncan's presentation will be followed by a short talk by Alv Otter Folkestad, a Norwegian sheep farmer who will discuss how he has found living alongside these birds. So Alv Otter...
Yeah, just to say, Alv Otter is also the #1 man in sea eagle research in Norway.
yeah,
but these two things are not unusual in the Norwegian context.
Yeah, and to add to that, he was previously the chairman and one of the board members of the Norwegian Wild Sheep Association, and has been living in areas in Norway with these birds since he was a child. He's led the Norwegian Sea Eagle Project since 1975, and was also heavily involved with the East Scotland reintroduction. So after Otter has delivered his talk this evening, it will be followed by a Q&A session. So before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. So the chat function may be disabled on this Teams setting. So please put any of your questions you have in the Q&A. There's a little icon with 2 speech bubbles and a question mark, and it says Q&A. So your questions can also be submitted anonymously if you want to do that too. And if you have a specific question for either of our presenters today, just please specify in your question. So now I will hand over to you, Duncan.
Oh, thank you. I'll try start by sharing my screen. Right, can people see the slideshow?
Not yet.
Okay. Try again. How about now?
Yep, I can see that now.
Right. Okay, so we're talking this evening about white-tailed sea eagle reintroductions in Europe. There we go. So, first of all, the bird. This is the symbol of the Swedish Skärgårdsstiftelsen, which is a somewhat National Trust-like organisation that owns property in the small islands off off Stockholm in Sweden. That's a large female, but it gives you an impression, and that's me, a normal-sized human. So that gives you an impression of the size of the bird if it's a large individual anyway. But one of the first things that it's probably worth making a point about is that this bird is not really an eagle. It is in the clade with kites and fish eagles, which is a long way from the clade of true eagles like golden eagles. And this is very much evident in the way the animal behaves. In some ways, it being called an eagle at all is unfortunate in the modern context, because everyone knows that eagles are fierce. But these birds are much less aggressive, much less predatory than are the true eagles, things like golden eagles. A large amount of the food that they get is scavenged. So this is the modern distribution. The purple is resident, salmon pink is summer range, and blue is the non-breeding winter range. And there have been reintroductions for many years now, since the 1970s. So there's an eagle being taken from a nest at Verafjord, which is near Trondheim, and that one was reintroduced to Ireland, and we'll talk about Ireland in more detail a little later. And there it is, out of the nest. As you can see, it's quite a big bird, but in the nest they're not at all aggressive. You can basically treat them like a big chicken, and they very rarely attempt to bite or claw. And that's not like that with a golden eagle, for example. And then once you've collected them, essentially you put them into a charter aircraft, and then you release them. I'll get into more detail later on. So this is the Irish Environment Minister and the Norwegian Ambassador. The release this year was late because the birds were kept an extra period of time in Norway because bird flu was on that year. So we needed to be sure that none of them were infected. So this was done for the cameras, but these are very... These birds are perhaps rather older than they would normally be released for that special reason, but they're a very robust species and not subject to any real difficulties. It's very hard to injure them. They're big, tough birds. They don't seem they seem to have very strong immune systems. They're basically, technically speaking, pretty simple birds to deal with. So a bit of history. This is the first reintroduction programme from Norway to Scotland, which started in 1975. And these are the principal people involved. Harold Masund, he's now well in his 80s. I'm still in contact with him, and he's an interesting guy in many ways. He spent his career in the Norwegian Air Force. John Love, who died a couple of years ago, who was the main man on the Scottish side, and Roy Dennis, who many of you probably will know, who is still going strong and currently reintroducing ospreys and sea eagles to the south of England, among other activities. So this is the original collection was done up at Bodo, which is the Norwegian coast around about on the Arctic Circle. And those there are the first 7 white-tailed sea eagles reintroduced to the Scottish West Coast reintroduction in 75. And back then they got the RAF to transport them because it was the Cold War and they were operating in and out of Bodo Airport all the time anyway. These days we have to use and pay for charter flights. So the reintroduction was conducted on the Isle of Rum. That's where you see the reintroduction site towards the top left of the picture there. And in phase 1 of the West Coast reintroduction, 82 chicks were released. Then from 1993 to 98, they reintroduced a further 58 chicks at a site in Western Ross, a bit further up the coast. And then in the East Coast, 2007 to 2012, a further 85 chicks and Alvotar was the principal source for the birds that were released there. And currently, the core area of their breeding is this area that's shown in purple. So they are now solidly established on the Scottish west coast. There are odd pairs now as far north as Orkney, and there are a couple inland in the Highlands and a few around where the East Coast release was. But most of the East Coast release birds moved over into when they became adults, they mated up with birds over in the main West Coast area. So that reintroduction has been more of a reinforcement of the West Coast population and hasn't so much established a separate core on the East Coast. And a lot of work has been done on the populations in Scotland. What you've got here is the actual number of territorial pairs is the black line with squares. And then there are a couple of models, the green line and the blue line. And up to 2013, all of those were very close. And then the last year for which I have numbers is 2020, when the Scottish population has reached 150 pairs, very close to the predicted line in the SNH model from 2016. And it seems that the expansion is continuing, and this year or next year they should hit 200 pairs. So once they start to develop, it takes quite a time, but then the population grows really pretty fast once it's got going and there is solid production going on among the reintroduced animals. This is just to look at it again and extrapolating further into the future. This graph assumes that there are no density dependent effects on the breeding population. If that's true, then by 2040 there should be 900 pairs or so in Scotland. But of course, at some point, density dependence is going to start to become a factor. And if you assume carrying capacities at different numbers of individuals, as this graph does, then that shows you where the population is expected to end up. But even on the lowest end projections, you'd be looking at a population for Scotland of getting on for 500 pairs. And of course, the birds will eventually spread by natural spread out of Scotland. But that may take rather a long time. It's now, getting on for 50 years, 50 years, it's 48 years since the first reintroduction, and still the birds are pretty much confined, apart from a few pairs, to the west coast of the Scottish Highlands. So it may take a considerable time before they spread to other regions. And that's really because they tend to settle relatively close to existing birds. This graph shows the distance to the nearest neighbour when a new pair establishes itself. And the biggest, the most likely is between 5 and 15 kilometres, shall we say, from the nearest other pair, and only a very few establish themselves further than, say, 50 kilometres away from the nearest other pair. So there is pretty strong tendency for the birds to eventually settle close to other established pairs. So taking a look at the reintroduction to Ireland, this is the one I know most about. I've been involved in it from its beginning, from the with Tuaga Newgard, I did the feasibility study, and then he and I have been primarily responsible for organising the Norwegian end, both in phase 1 and phase 2. So the collection area is the area, roughly speaking, the area marked in yellow, in the yellow box. It's in what's called mid-Norway, the Trøndelag region. And the releases have been down in the southwest of Ireland. So in phase 1, in total, we transferred 100 birds, exactly 100. And phase 2 is underway. It now looks as if they may want birds in 2025 as well. Originally, when it was planned, phase 2, it was going to be another 5-year project and ending this year. But we're waiting to see what the Irish want. We can certainly supply them with more birds if they want it. So in phase 2, so far, in 2020 was a really bad breeding season because of the weather conditions, which is why we only managed to get 9 chicks. This year was an unusually good year, and we got 27, with the upshot that the releases in phase 2 have now been also exactly 100 birds. The original release site was at Killarney, but it's now been expanded to 3 other sites: Tarbert, Lough Derg, and Lough Corrib. Lough Corrib is new, and that's one of the reasons that they may want another tranche of birds next year to solidify that kernel by giving it enough birds released there that they'll be able to find each other and settle down in 3-4 years' time. So there's the actual physical doing of it is really pretty straightforward, but of course there is the licensing. These are the 2 main bits of paper that we need to get in Norway. The one on the left is permission from the Norwegian Environment Agency to collect the birds, and the one on the right is CITES licensing, also from the Environment Agency, which allows us to export them to Ireland. So how it goes in a year, this is one of the crib sheets that I make for myself. It can be quite difficult to find a nest if you don't know exactly where it is. So these are to remind me when the spring starts where I ought to be looking. So this is a nest on the west coast near Trondheim. It's in the tree, which is in the white box in the main picture, and in the yellow box in the little inset picture. And the blurred area thing is the exact location. So there's the nest with 2 downy chicks about 1 month old in it. They're much too young to collect. But the first thing we do is that once we've got to later May, when the chicks can thermoregulate properly for themselves, then we go and check the nests to find out what's in them. Because we only have permission from the Norwegian authorities to collect 1 bird from a nest that has 2 or more chicks in it. And only 1 nest in 5 has more than 1 chick in it. So that means to get 20 birds, we need to check around about 100 nests. And that's, as you can understand, is a considerable amount of work. And it's done by a network of volunteers up and down the coast, people who are interested to help. They get expenses, but they don't get paid as such, because that would just bust the budget. But they do get petrol and overnighting expenses and so on. So here's another one. These birds can actually nest quite close to habitations. They prefer not to, but they're perfectly capable of doing it. So there's a housing subdivision on the edge of an arm of Trondheimsfjord, and it's got a nest within about 300 meters. If you know where, you can see it quite clearly from the houses if you know where to look. It's amazing how many people had no idea the birds were there. So there again, 2 small chicks in the nest. This is an easy nest to check. There's a walking trail along the top of the cliff that this photograph was taken from. And here's another nest check in early June, no breeding this year. This is on an outer island called Tarva. And out there are no trees. And because of that, the birds are willing to nest on the ground. And in this case, they're just nesting straight out on the open moorland. These are really good nests to collect from, just for the ease of collection. But in this case, there wasn't any breeding in that year. species is also capable of nesting on artificial structures. These are a couple of sea markers on the islands a bit southwest of Trondheim. And in particular, the marine navigation on the right, that has a flashing light on top. And through the early part of the incubation period, it's in operation, it's flashing, but the birds are nevertheless breeding. Later on, it's daylight all day long at that latitude. And there are ships coming, or small boats coming in and out of the local harbour quite frequently at this location. So then, later June, we organise collection. We usually try to do it all over one long weekend. Most of our collaborators, remember, have got day jobs, so the weekend is the main time to do it. And then we might try and collect odd extra birds from more remote nests in the following week, and then they're usually exported at the end of that week. So you've got birds. Some of them are on walk-in sites, like the one bottom left. Some are on pretty small trees where the weather conditions mean that the trees won't grow particularly high, like in the bottom middle picture. That's on an outer skerry. And where the birds can get them, they prefer to nest in trees rather than on cliffs. So those nests tend to take a bit more work to get at. So usually done in later June. The reason for this is the chicks are then 8 to 9 weeks old, like the bird bottom left is actually probably 7 to 8 weeks old. By that time, they're getting on for full size. They are able to tear up food for themselves. They don't need the parents to do it anymore. They're big and strong and robust, so there's no real prospect of us injuring them. But their flight feathers, importantly, are not fully developed at that age, so they can't fly away. So that's the optimal time to take them. And about, as I said, about one nest in 5 checked has 2, and exceptionally they'll have 3 chicks. And we are required to always leave 1 chick in the nest. The reason for this is to reduce stress to the parent birds, because they can then complete the breeding cycle uninterrupted. So to get 20 chicks, we need on average to check about 100 nests. And some of our collectors, these are what we call the Flatanger gang. They're associated with a well-known man called Ole Martin Dale, who runs Sea Eagle Safaris, among other things. He's a great guy. And these are, I think, his sons-in-law, in fact. And they're rock climbers as well, so they rather enjoy going to nests like this one, which is, you can see it on the right, it's about 40% of the way down the cliff. You can see in that shot. That's a really very difficult nest, and unless you're a very good rock climber, that's one that we wouldn't normally take from, but they enjoy the challenge, and they've got the equipment and the skills. But perhaps we get the most of our birds from ground nesting pairs in the skerries, especially in the case of the Irish reintroduction of islands called Hitra and Frøya. These have the advantage that if you've got the boat, that you can go and get a lot of birds really quite quickly. And also it's daylight 24/7. This is what it looks like at 11:50 p.m. And on the collection time. This is a year when, because of the weather conditions, we had to collect through the extended dusk and dawn. There is no real darkness at that time. And then the nests are walk-in. That's one of our main collectors there, Christian Werkelund, and he's also a sheep farmer. He keeps his sheep out on the skerries, and he heard about the project, volunteered to join it. And then you just put the bird in a bag, take it back to your boat. Here we are on the way back with 6 birds in the bag after one evening's work. So doing it from the skerries is really pretty efficient. So we're all pretty happy. Then the birds are brought ashore. So this is the Hitrafroya gang. Turgar Nugard is my colleague, recently retired at NINA, and he and I are the co-coordinators of the whole system, of the whole operation. The bird is stuffed, and my son Roy, he's in it essentially because he was part of my bubble during COVID, and he's never managed to escape. Then they're kept close to the airport in a place called Stjørdal for between 2 and 10 days by a colleague, Tom Roger Osteros, who lives there. Then usually the day before they're exported, they're ringed. There's a veterinary check, that's the vet on the right there, and we take their biometrics from which you can assess their sex pretty exactly. And they're issued with a veterinary health certificate. This stuff tends to get complicated, and we'd have to find out what the British rules are for this now. But in principle, the vet issues a veterinary certificate saying that they're healthy. The specifics there are to address specifically Irish concerns. And then the following day, they're put into these containers, which are really best used for cats and dogs, but they're legally required to use on aircraft. We cover the cage doors with cardboard or with paper because there have been cases where the birds appear to have managed to get their legs into the mesh there and injured themselves. So in order to stop that from happening again, we close off the mesh. So then they're put on a charter airplane with this guy, Arturo. He's one of the small joys of working on this project. Is Arturo is a very extrovert Italian, and every year that he comes and lands, it's fun for all concerned. He's also a good pilot. Then they're taken to Ireland. It's about a 3.5-4 hour flight, and these are the pens in Killarney going up in 2007. The birds are fed through a hole in the back. We are concerned that they are not exposed to humans as a source of food. The only time they ever really see humans is during processing, and that's a pretty scary experience, so they're unlikely to be attracted to humans because of it. The food is always supplied to them blind through holes in the back. Usually they're caged 2 at a time. If we do get broods of 3, then we'll put the siblings together. We'll take 2 of them and leave the 3rd one. And also we're sure to make sure that these are roughly even in size, because it's not a good idea to put birds in if they're very different in age. Then on release day, on a normal release day, usually the pens are lowered, the pen doors are lowered during the night, so that when the dawn comes, the birds just fly out when they feel ready. So there's one of the birds. The Irish put wing tags on them. And off they go out into the environment. And then there's a food dump kept close to the release cages, basically for as long as the birds want. It's your purpose to keep these animals alive through their first winter as much as you can, and making sure they've got a secure supply of food helps them do that. They tend to feed there, and this mimics what the adults do. The adults come back to the nest with food or the nest vicinity and dump it for some weeks, and the chicks feed in them. And then as the chicks learn to feed for themselves, they then tend to drift off and away. So supplying them with food mimics that. And then the Irish have been checking their dispersal and monitoring. So here's an example of a 2009 release bird who was named Star. The release site was that purple blob. Sorry, the release site was Killarney, my mistake. which is bottom left, he pretty soon dispersed away, moved all over the island of Ireland, and then in the later period concentrated in that area in Galway, which is where he is now settled and nesting. Or here's another bird, 2008 release, the male L, wandered as far as the Orkney Islands, but then came back to Ireland and I believe is breeding in Ireland now. And you get this general pattern. Here's a male bird, Lachlan from 2010. So he was released in August 2010, bottom left of the graph, stayed very close to the release site until the spring of 2011, then moved away quite a distance to about 250 kilometers away. But then the next autumn, that's over the summer, then the next autumn came back close to the release site. Then the next year wandered away during the summer. That's very much the typical pattern when they're immatures. But there is a tendency for the males to be more philopatric than the females are. This is the same as in most bird species. The males will come back much more closely to the area of release as they mature. The females are wandering around more, and really what they're doing is looking out for males to breed with, whereas the males are looking for a territory. So there's the breeding success so far. This year, there were 15 active pairs. There were 15 pairs. 12 of the nests were active. 10 of that means they attempted to breed. 10 of those actually were successful. Breeding success of 0.83, which is good. In Norway, the breeding success is 0.67. But of course, there's very little competition in Ireland at the moment. 13 young fledged, and that was 1.3 per successful nest. So we're beginning to be quite happy with the breeding success. There was a problem around about 2018, 2019 with bird flu and bad weather, both at the same time. That's the reason for the reduction in the number of pairs. It killed several of the breeding birds outright, and probably killed a number of other birds as well. And the populations had to recover from that. And in at least two of the most productive pairs, the female died, and that knocked back breeding success quite a bit. But that perturbation now seems to be over, and they seem to be back online. And at the moment, the population is looking reasonably secure. And they're often breeding quite well. So here's 3 chicks at a nest near Lough Derg, which is a big inland lake in Ireland, in 2020. And so we're pretty satisfied with breeding success in the Irish reintroduction so far. And another thing, of course, is the publicity side. The first pair ever to breed in Ireland bred on a big old oak tree on a small island just off the town of Mount Shannon, in full view of the car park at the little harbour there, and with little boats going in and out all the time right past them. So the Irish set up a visitor centre, and it's an important part of the development that the local community participation encourages eagle protection and conservation. At this site, this was the first ever breeding, 7 years into the reintroduction, 10,000 visitors, and that added €500,000 to the local economy in that year. And there are magazines published, and it's become a very popular project. The Irish Prime Minister is usually at the releases. He had the releases this year, and there's now an osprey reintroduction, which started last year because the Irish politicians said, we want more. And when the Prime Minister is telling you that he wants it, it happens really very fast. And this was in the Irish Times this year, just back in August. When the first reintroductions were made, the Irish farmers had heard the stuff coming out of Scotland, where eagles, white-tailed sea eagles, are said to predate sheep, which we in Norway find odd. It's the only country in the whole world where this is maintained to happen. So the hypotheses would have to be either that for some reason the eagles are behaving very differently in Scotland, or that there's something different about the social situation in Scotland. I am Scottish, and I'm willing to say that I think the second hypothesis is the more plausible one. So in Ireland, even kindergartens have got eagles on their wall. And there's a big new mural in the Isle of Wight where sea eagles are also being reintroduced at the moment. They're using birds from Scotland, and Roy Dennis is the main guy behind that. There's also a reintroduction to Asturias in Spain. This is their Facebook site, which is a very good example of a piece of public outreach. And here I'll bring in Alvotar Folkestad in particular. That's who was named as an honoured member of the Norwegian Ornithological Association. That's the certificate for it. And this is Alvotar collecting a bird for the Asturias reintroduction 3 years ago. And there's the birds in his case are kept on his farm in these small enclosures. And in the foreground there is a sheep, which he was hand raising at the time, and which followed him around wherever he went. There's the eagles being put in the boxes. Cardboard boxes are actually better and safer than the IATA required flight cages, but we're not allowed to use them on aircraft. So when they get loaded, they're in the IATA, the required IATA cages. So there's Alvotar loading up the birds, in this case in Ålesund, and giving an interview to TV2, which is the ITV of Norway. So in the Asturias reintroduction, 8 were released in 2021. We wanted to have a release with a smallish number of birds in the first year, while everyone got used to the systems. And then it was up to 17 in 2022. And to date, survival rate's been 72%, which is very satisfactory. There were no releases in 23-4 for political reasons. There was a regional election in Asturias, and the populist government, it was essentially stopped by the agriculture minister of Asturias as a cheap piece of electioneering, I think is the short way to put it, ahead of the election, which has now taken place to keep a small part of the farming base on his side. They'd also been reading stuff on irresponsible blogs from Scotland. It now appears that it may resume in 2025, though it will probably be in Galicia rather than in Asturias because of these complex political reasons. There are 3 pairs, and likely there will be an attempt to reproduce next year, we think. So looking at reintroductions across Europe, there was the first one, 1975, Norway to Scotland. There was a very small reintroduction, only of 15-20 animals from Germany to the Czech Republic in 79. Central European populations are doing pretty well at the moment. Another unusual reintroduction from Poland to Israel in 1992. As I'll show you later, the birds were formerly native to Israel, and the last native ones died probably in the 50s or 60s. Among other things, the Israelis had this pest control population where they put out poisoned baits for rats and mice over the entire country on a grid. Unfortunately, they put them in meat, and it had this effect of very badly damaging their entire raptor population. That was back in the 60s. Norway to Ireland from 2007. And there's the Scotland-England reintroduction from 2019. Norway, Spain, Asturias, 2021. And possibly Norway to Cumbria, start date next year. We will see. And I should say there's also still a live project from Norway to Andalusia, but whether that's going to come to anything remains to be seen. So just a quick bit before we end on the former distribution around the Mediterranean and the Middle East. I've been chasing up every record good enough so you can say it was definitely a white-tailed sea eagle, and you can say definitely where it was breeding, and those basically date from the 1840s onwards, really only from the 1860s when the literature gets good enough. By that time, they were getting pretty rare in the Western Mediterranean, in the more settled areas where people had guns but were using them on the wildlife rather than on each other, would be the cynical way to put it. That's one of the reasons they lasted for such a long time in Sardinia, where they lived through the 1950s, and in the former Turkish Empire in what is now Greece and the Balkans, where the animals survived through into the middle of the 20th century in quite large numbers. There's also, they bred into the 19th century onto the Nile Delta, a number of records there, mostly at a place called Lake Marmara, which was badly damaged by the Suez Canal when it was dug, which introduced large amounts of very saline water, basically collapsed the ecosystem. And there they used to nest on the ground in reed beds. And there are a whole bunch of mummified records from Middle Nile. There's a giant bird necropolis on the Middle Nile with several million mummified birds in it, mostly sacred ibis, but all sorts of other species as well. It includes 4 white-tailed sea eagles and also, interestingly, 4 African fish eagles. So probably the line of contact between those 2 species was around about the what is the modern Egyptian Sudan border. And it's probably also worth mentioning, because digging into these things, I've read a lot of interesting old travelers' reports, and here's one from a naturalist in 1860 who was visiting what is now Western Greece. And to quote, "The old birds were very bold and often came within gunshot of us, but I would not fire at them as I did not want a specimen. And the shepherds begged us not to kill them, as they bred there year after year and kept away other birds of prey which were destructive of their lambs." So the Greek shepherds of the 19th century, people who lived out with their sheep year round, they were of the opinion that the species actively protected their birds from other more predatory, their sheep from other more predatory species. So if you feed in the data from here and extrapolate it, because if they're going to breed widely in, say, what is now Albania, there's no reason whatsoever that they would not be breeding in peninsular Italy. The reason there is probably that the species went extinct early. They went extinct in England in 1740, remember, because conditions were more settled in Italy and people there had roughly the same attitudes as the English towards shooting raptors. So when you can be pretty sure by extrapolating the places that they're known to have lived to places with the same climates, then the probable former natural distribution looked like that. They would have bred pretty much around the Mediterranean basin, except maybe for the places where it's heavy desert right up to the coast in Libya and Egypt. And looking at a little bit in genetics, essentially the species divides into western and eastern genetic clades, like so many species do, and it seems to be down to different ice age refugia. So the western refugia was presumably Iberia and North Africa, and the eastern refugia around the Black Sea, southern Black Sea. It does mean that for reintroductions to Cumbria, then IUCN guidelines would suggest that you need to use west birds. In other words, birds sourced from Norway are the only large surviving population that is purely west in its genetic origins. There's also, just as an aside, strong inbreeding in the island populations in Iceland and Greenland, and there's a case to augment their genetics by, for example, taking Icelandic birds to Greenland and vice versa, because their breeding success is rather poor, and it's rather likely that that's down to inbreeding depression. And that might also be true for the tiny population that remains on the Greek-Turkish border, where there are only 6 or 7 pairs left. They've also got extremely low breeding success, and it's probably mostly down to inbreeding. So to summarize the whole thing, this is an adaptable species. It's robust. It was once common near freshwaters and sea coasts in Eurasia and North Africa, from the Nile in the south to tundra areas in the far north, Greenland to Japan. The cause of extinction is clear. It was shot. Also egg collecting and pesticides, and these factors no longer apply over most of its former range. It's robust and adaptable, and it can live close to human habitation. It prefers to breed more than 1 kilometre or 2 away from humans if it can do it, but it certainly does nest within a few hundred metres of occupied houses. There just appeared to be an inbreeding depression in small isolated populations, but there have been a series of reintroductions since 1975. So we've now got well-developed and effective methods. We know how to do this. The main factors, if you look across the range of reintroductions that have been done, which determine where they've been carried out, have been 1, a group of motivated people in the country, 2, government regulators who are willing to give the programme the necessary licensing, and sufficient funding to collect, translocate, and release enough birds. And if that's done, then the chances of success are very high indeed. So thank you for your attention. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Duncan. That was excellent and really insightful. And yeah, it was particularly interesting, I think, to hear about the different reintroduction projects and also have that insight into what is required to undertake a reintroduction project. So before we go on to the questions, I'm just going to hand over to Alv Otter, who has joined us, I think. Alv Otter, can you hear us? I think you might have to unmute and...
Ja. Rwy'r din microphone ar på mute, Alvotar. Du trenger å slå på mikrofon og kamera.
Okay. I think we'd nearly had a muted.
Okay, din mikrofon er fortsatt på mute.
That should be good now.
Yeah.
Cool.
I should be there.
Hi.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, Duncan. Hi, Faye.
Hi, thank you for joining us. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, Alvotta, and then after your talk, we have a few questions just to go through. So over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the white-tailed eagle and the potential threats to livestock, and what evidence we have for the white-tailed eagle and its possible impact to livestock. If you're looking back to the different handbooks, there are several handbooks that count for sheep and lambs or other ungulates may fall victim to the white-tailed eagle. There is several authors mentioning that, and particularly so in Norway, it was the man Vilgos, who was the white-tailed eagle man from the 50s and onwards. And he, in his material, he accepted some cases when the white-tailed eagle seemed to have killed livestock. But there that was thought that the white-tailed eagle did kill livestock, and that was the belief when we started in the 1970s for the Norwegian Sea Eagle Project, and we didn't deny that at that time. But then when we went on with when the field works, we didn't find any cases of white-tailed eagle have been killing livestock, and so after some years we had to turn around the question, not what we thought we should find out how many and in which situation they were killing livestock, but then we had to turn the question the opposite way, and it was simply, do the white-tailed eagle kill livestock at all? And when we are looking to the Vilgos, he had accepted 14 cases of eagle kills of livestock. And if we are going more nearer into his what he is saying, so it was not more than one. In one case, he thought that we could talk about that the white-tailed eagle was the killer. But when we had been through our project for a 10 years period, then we had to summarize in the 1980s, and then we had to conclude that up to then we had no evidence for white-tailed eagle killing livestock in Norway at all. And what we have been doing after that, during a 50 years period, then we have been following up. We are not suspecting the white-tailed eagle to kill livestock at all. It's only to look and to state that what we concluded in the 1980s is still in working. And even when we are looking at white-tailed eagle attacks on livestock and ungulates elsewhere, we have more or less the same history, the same situation. And when we in Norway in late 1980s started to systematically to make autopsies of what was suspected to be losses of livestock caused by the fully protected predators on what we call the four big ones. It was the the bear and the wolf and the wolverine and last one, the lynx, and the golden eagle. So we have had through the last year the period from 1987 up to today. We have a system where we are checking the carcass of livestock suspected to be killed by protected predators, and through all these years, there is reported, I think it's more than 200,000 reports of that have been checked in Norway, and from that, not a single one. I'm coming back to it in a couple of minutes. More correctly, there is one recorded as not killed by white-tailed eagle, but eaten from when it was still alive. But that was in a special situation. So. And what have we have looked at Scotland, and we had heard about the conflicts in Scotland, and that the Scottish white-tailed eagles have been blamed for real serious kills of lambs and even adult sheep now and then. And to us, it's more or less fairy tales, all of it. And I have had the opportunity to look at how it has been and to what evidence it has been concluded that yes, the white-tailed eagle may kill livestock in Scotland. It doesn't look like anything we have been into from the Norwegian project on making autopsies on livestock kills from fully protected predators. That's what we think. And there is sometimes I've been in Scotland many times, and I have very good friends in Scotland, and I have talked to sheep farmers in Scotland and to the people who are monitoring the white-tailed eagles there. And what I very often hear there is that, well, in Norway you sheep are lambing inside or in by, either in the sheep houses or in by, and then they say that it's not possible to compare the experience from Norway to what we have been experiencing in Scotland, and because the hill sheep farming in Scotland. But then I think the people are not aware that even in Norway we have the old tradition in Norway on sheep farming along the coast was hill sheep farming, and during the last decades it has been established once more. We have the small North breed of short-tailed sheep in Norway. It was on the way to get lost in Norway, but in the partly in the 50s and particularly so from the 60s and 70s onwards, there have been done very much to restore, both to save this breed of the small short-tailed sheep, very much like what we had on, particularly so on the Orkneys, the breeds, short-tailed breeds there, but even on Hebrides and somewhere else. And by now, particularly so from the 1990s, we have had a very marked increase in breeding the old Norwegian sheep, what we call the Norse sheep, very small animals, and they are most of them. They are living or going out in the moors and the heathland through the winter and the whole year, and they are lambing outside all the way. So we have from only very few left in the area of Bergen. By now, I think we have about 10% of the total Norwegian sheep stock in Norway is of the old Norse breed. And so we have these in the areas where we have the sea eagles. And by now, I can state that in the whole area where we are breeding the old Norse sheep, we even have very dense breeding population of the white-tailed eagle all the way from the most southern part of Norway and high up in other Norway. And there are no problems. During the years, we have only one situation where the sheep owner had to put down a small lamb, and he got even the photographs of the whole situation. There was a white-tailed eagle sitting beside this lamb and eating on the lamb's hind legs. And when this man was photographing the whole situation, and the eagle left when the man come up to the lamb, but the lamb was still alive, and it had been very, very ill before the eagle landed, and so it was in coma, simply in coma, and it was I made an autopsy of this lamb, and it had heavy infections both in its lungs and in all its legs. So it was more like a still live carcass than it was a live lamb. And that is the only one case where, yes, the eagle was on the way to kill this lamb, and if it had not have been disturbed, it had simply eaten it to death. But the way the lamb was on the way to pass away anyway. So, and that is the only one we have in Norway during all these years. Among the reports covering all these reports on carcass autopsies, more than 200,000 single reports, and among them there are more than 9,000 cases where the golden eagle had been concluded to be the killer, in which situation should be a part of the total story. But it's simple. So more than 9,000 lambs killed by the golden eagle in Norway and in these autopsies, and then one single one where the white-tailed eagle was on the way to eat a very ill lamb to death. So the conclusion in Norway, and it is also interesting to say that historical papers are in agreement with that. If you are going back in the story before the very heavy decline on the Norwegian white-tailed eagle population, and when it was removed from most of Norway, in southern Norway, from what we know from the period before that, it's quite like we have today. The white-tailed eagle was not regarded as any problem, even back in the 1800s, 1700s, and before that. What is written about this? The golden eagle was, now and then, it was regarded as it could now and then make or give rather heavy losses on lambs and goat kids and so on, but not the white-tailed eagle. And that was the knowledge before the modern time, and after we have had this the period when the Norwegian Parliament decided to kill all of the large predators to save both the livestock and what I thought of the other living creatures around. So what we have been witnessing in Norway is that by now I think we have more than a fivefold increase in the total Norwegian sea eagle population since it was fully protected back in 1968. And what we can say today is that it has close to recovered all what we know about the earlier breeding range in Norway, and there has not been any problem with the white-tailed eagle in Norway. And that's what we had to tell people in other parts of Europe. The white-tailed eagle is a part of the fauna along not only the coastal area in Norway. We thought it was a coastal bird back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But we have to realize that, well, the white-tailed eagle is just as natural along the inland lakes and the big rivers, and even high up through the valleys, almost to the mountain areas in Norway. And during the summer, when the sheep are grazing to the mountain tops in some parts of Norway, when sheep dies from other reasons, we will have the white-tailed eagle as one of the most natural scavenger in the area, and they're cleaning up, and it is a part of the Norwegian nature as it was in in most of the rest of Europe back in the past. Okay, I think that was all.
Great, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with white-tailed eagles and livestock. It was really interesting. So yeah, thank you both for these fantastic talks this evening. And we've still got time for some questions. If you're both happy to answer them. Duncan, I'll pop you back on the screen as well. Brill. Cool. So one of the first questions we had was about, I think, the management and ongoing monitoring of reintroduced white-tailed eagles. So we've got, are camera traps and live streamings used to monitor the birds, or is that too expensive, not feasible?
I know the Irish, we remember we were the supply end, and in Norway, there are 1 or 2 webcams, I think, where you can look at white-tailed sea eagle nests. But basically in Norway, they're just there. They're unremarkable parts, or you might remark on them kind of like a heron if you've got nothing better to do with your time. But for most people living on the coast, they're just part of the background these days. In Ireland, they've put in more effort on monitoring for obvious reasons. They put satellite tags on most of their birds, I think, and they used to have a live stream breeding camera, but the pair then moved its site and they couldn't get a camera on the new one. Camera traps, if you were baiting animals to food, for example, that might be worth doing, but just a passively flying by birds, that I don't think that would be very efficient. So if you're monitoring, probably the best bang for the buck is to use satellite tags. On the other hand, in places like the Lake District, where you've got a very large number of interested people, then you might be able to keep a decent tab on the birds less invasively just by using cover rings. These birds will spend a great deal of their time just sitting around on harbour buoys or out on a beach or on top of a tree. And in Britain, one of the advantages you have is this enormous army of enthusiastic wildlife people who are used to reporting things, and you may well be able to keep a good tab on how your population is doing just from re-sightings that way.
Right, that's, yeah, really interesting. Yeah, regarding the monitoring of them, and if, yeah, there's lots of people bird watching, that can be really helpful. So another question around the kind of reintroduction of birds. Someone has asked, when new birds are introduced to strengthen a population, has there been conflict between the new birds and the already established birds?
I've never heard of that. I know that, for example, 2 of the most productive breeding females in the Irish reintroduction died of bird flu. And that was the biggest setback that the population had. But then they were replaced within a couple of years by birds from the phase 2 reintroduction, which started breeding at below the normal age of maturity. But they had a very experienced male to breed with, which helped. At the moment, in places like Ireland, there's no serious competition between the birds. There's just so much habitat which is unoccupied. There's nothing else that lives in the way that white-tailed sea eagles do. There's no effective competition between the birds because the food supply is at present super abundant. Later on, when the population gets up to full densities, of course, one of the things we know from Norway is that there is a spike in mortality at about the age of 5 or 6, which is interpreted as likely being due to birds having to fight to break into breeding territories. That's the age at which they become sexually mature. We don't know that, but there is this spike in mortality at that age, which doesn't seem to be possible to account for. But in Scotland, say, it's 50 years into the reintroduction and they've not got to that point yet.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I suppose you do hear about that in other animals. So the next question is around risk. So Alv Otter, it'd be really good to have your opinions on this one as well. What level of risk do you think birds introduced to Cumbria have of being illegally killed, and what measures can be taken to reduce the risk?
I'm not quite sure. I know that there is some tradition in Britain to control the predators of different predators. And if, of course, if you are thinking of the sea eagle as a predator and thinking of the sea eagles as a possible risk for livestock, or that they are killing other species, other bird species, and so on. I think there should be some risk for people killing sea eagles illegally, but then I think it's very important to underline that even the white-tailed eagle is a predator. Even what we know about the white-tailed eagle is that most of what it is eating, either from fish or from mammals or from birds, are dead on beforehand. Even there, they are scavengers, much more than predators, and that is even in Scotland. And in the last book of John Love, I think it was mentioned that when you go back to the 80s and the last half of the 19th century, people looked at the white-tailed eagle as not a noble predator, because it preferred to what I called fish and fully food. So there wasn't these noble, like the golden eagle was a much more noble hunter and predator. And I think it should be worthwhile to stress what the normal role of the white-tailed eagle is in the ecosystems, both in the coastal ecosystems and inland. Even up high up in the mountains, they are what they're doing in the Norwegian mountains. They are cleaning up or recirculating the biological matter. And there is the most important role of the white-tailed eagle, to my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the Irish reintroduction, the major cause of mortality in the first years was death from poisoning.
Mm.
This was not targeted at the white-tailed sea eagle, but it revealed a practice that a lot of sheep just die out on the hill in Ireland. And then some farmers were in the habit of illegally lacing up the carcass with strychnine or carbofuran, and the purpose was to kill foxes. But the white-tailed sea eagles started scavenging the corpses, and they had radio tags on, so this practice was suddenly revealed, and it killed possibly a dozen birds total in the end. But the Irish government then made it very illegal the very next year. It was already illegal, but now they tightened the law, so it's now illegal in Ireland to use poison anywhere except indoors and in a vegetable-based bait. So we haven't had a poisoning death in Ireland for some years now. A couple have been shot in Northern Ireland when they turned up on the only grouse moor in the whole of Northern Ireland. And there the practices are similar to Scotland. So for Cumbria, you're really asking us a question about social conditions and practices in Cumbria, and you know a great deal more about that than we do.
Yeah, it's always nice to have your opinions and insight on it. But yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, really interesting answers. So the next question I've got is, have either of you any advice regarding talking to Cumbrian farmers who perhaps have been given misinformation from Scotland about sheep predation?
Yeah, if I can just beat Alvotar to the draw on this, he'll give the main answer. You should get Alvotar to talk to them. My experience has very much been on these things that myself, for example, I would be clearly identified in the British context as coming from the wildlife side, and therefore they're not going to believe anything I say. Or at least it's going to be a very hard sell. Alvotar is a sheep farmer. Therefore, what he says cannot be lightly dismissed. And it would be better if it is practical to have the sheep farmers of Cumbria identify with the sheep farmers of Ireland, where you saw the recent Times thing, and the sheep farmers of Norway, rather than the sheep farmers of Scotland. The times we live in now, on all sorts of issues, internet tribal membership, you could call it, does tend to trump, if you'll pardon the pun, any amount of data.
Yeah, it's that kind of culture at the moment.
So I think you should get in first with Alvotar and other sheep farmers so that it's presented as the sheep farmers of Norway and Ireland say this is just great, and here's a lifelong sheep farmer to tell you why.
Yeah, it's similar like that. In the particularly so in the North Sheep Association. I think there's almost nobody thinking of white-tailed eagle as any problem at all. I'm close to everyone who are doing hill sheep farming in Norway with this small sheep breed is stating that the white-tailed eagles are no problem. They are among our sheep all year round. They're sitting in between them. They are sitting waiting for the ewe to get the lambs to have the afterbirth. If not the ewe are eating up the afterbirth, then the white-tailed eagle is there in the next at the next time, and there is absolutely no problem with the white-tailed eagle. But I had to say from some very few cases of bad experience, when when you find a sheep farmer who is blaming the white-tailed eagle for killing his lambs, being from the Old Norse breed or from the Norwegian white sheep breed, then you have to look at the husbandry of this guy, because it's when we have that type of blaming, then it is a bad sign of of bad husbandry in this area. That's our experience.
Thank you both. So yeah, I think we might have time for 2 more quick questions. So one of them is saying, thank you for a very interesting presentation and for your time. The birds clearly explore a lot. So what's to say that the Cumbrian birds wouldn't travel to, for example, Mull and Rum and remain there? And how would that affect the success of the project? So I think, for example, if birds are reintroduced into Cumbria, is there a high likelihood that they might travel elsewhere and remain there?
In the Irish reintroduction, the birds quite frequently wandered to Scotland. I showed you some pictures, but it really was very common. And also, they're following more or less the pattern that Norwegian birds do. The ones that we've got the data on, they tend to drift quite a long way north as young birds. But as they mature, they tend to focus in much more closely in the area from which they came from. And so far, none of the Irish birds have recruited into the Scottish population. There was the reintroduction in East Coast Scotland on the Tay estuary, but that was very near the developing West Coast. And there, a large proportion of the birds have moved over and are breeding on the West Coast. I think the distances down to Cumbria are large enough that that's not very likely to happen. Also, the displacement in the Scottish reintroduction, you're really only talking about 40 to 50 miles west. And that's a different axis to north and south. And the data in Norway is that the birds quite often move quite a long way north, at least ones that were studied from Trøndelag, which is in mid-Norway, and then they would come down and they would eventually settle nearby. So I don't think it's a problem, at least I don't think it's likely to be a problem. And looking at it on a wider geographical scale, a reintroduction in the Irish Sea area is very nicely placed as a developing kernel to link up with eventually with the Irish, the Scots, and the South English reintroductions. So if I were planning restoring the species on an Atlantic seaboard scale, then Cumbria is one of the places I would want. And I would also want Brittany, I think, or just south of Brittany in France, to link up with the Asturias reintroduction. And then that would, in the same manner that the red kite reintroduction was planned and carried out in Britain, where a number of kernels are established and they're beginning to merge now.
Brilliant. No, that's yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Duncan. And I'm going to squeeze in one last question for you both. So somebody has said, I'd be really interested to hear about what your favourite thing about white-tailed eagles is. You are clearly both very passionate about these birds. Why should we want them back here in Cumbria?
Well, first of all, I think I put it the other way around. You have to give me some compelling reason why they should not be there, since they are a natural part of the fauna. I've seen very many sea eagles in the course of my life. They're very common, but it's still, no day is completely wasted when you've seen a white-tailed sea eagle. It's just a beautiful bird to look at when it's moving in the environment. That's just an emotional reaction. And functionally, they'll tidy a lot of things up. They are basically vultures. They are closely related to kites, remember, not to the eagles. So they're useful to wider ecosystem health.
Yeah, so providing those ecosystem services. Alvarta?
Yeah, one of the think with the white-tailed eagle is that it's a big bird, yes, and it's long-living birds, and they are operating in pairs and they are territorial. So when you have the opportunity to follow these birds, the eagles, then you discover that they even are individuals, and so you can. It's so many different things you discover with the birds, and particularly so this individuality of the birds. You feel that, oh yeah, you meet a guy you know from before when you meet that bird, and the other one they have its own character in the opposite direction. We have some pairs who are behaving as they love each other much more than anything else on this bird, and you have other pairs come across with each other just before they are laying their eggs, and keeping together when they have chicks in the nest, but rest of the year you can't see both of them together at all. And maybe there is a bit of what you find familiar even among people in this individuality and the different characters you have among the eagles. And that's, for me, it has become one of the main reason why I found the white-tailed eagle so beautiful and so interesting.
Thank you for sharing that both. Yeah, that's lovely to hear. And yeah, I think I just want to say a big thank you for from everyone to you for presenting this evening and sharing your experiences with white-tailed sea eagles. Yeah, this has been the first event of the Cumbrian White-Tailed Eagle Project Social Feasibility Study, but next week we're doing our first in-person events, and then a few drop-in sessions around Cumbria. So yeah, hopefully we can meet some attendees in person at the events, and we'll have to look in getting you a holiday Alv Otter over to Cumbria.
Yeah, oh yeah. I would like very much to.
But yeah, thank you so much again for giving up your time, and yeah, you'll have to imagine a virtual round of applause. But yeah, thank you.
Mike, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you too.
Brilliant. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.